Okay, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. It's Kip Pheil, who leads the National Energy Technology Development Team for NRCS, and he's out in Oregon. Kip will be presenting today on energy services for ag sector landowners. So you can take it away, Kip.
Thanks, Tori, and thanks to you and to Milt both for the opportunity to talk to some of the folks here. And I'm going to just kind of roll. Most of this stuff's probably self-explanatory. I will point out that if you get a copy of this, this is a PDF version, and it's got this cool little bubble up here that gives you access to the notes. So I'll make some reference to there being notes in different places as we go through this whole thing. So, oops, going too fast. Alrighty, so this is basically the stuff I'm going to cover. It's a pretty high-cut kind of overview of what NRCS is doing in terms of energy, but hopefully it'll kind of give you some grounding. So the first thing I listed there was terms, and actually terms are going to be scattered throughout the whole darn thing. This is kind of a quick thing about me, and there's kind of the first dose of, I guess, jargon and acronyms and whatnot. Again, those are in the notes. Most of them aren't that critical, but I suppose in tribute to my alma mater, I should say that this particular OSU is the one in Oregon, not the one in Oklahoma or the one in Ohio or some other Okanagan, somewhere like that. So anyway, and then my little box at the top is just a plug for making sure you use units. So there's apparently an interesting possible connection between 63 and 157 because it looks like 220 volts, but it's not. So again, you'll have to look at the notes. I'm not going to take more time with that if you want to know what that means. So, and then a few other items before we get into it, just kind of a short list. And the first thing is when I talk from an NRCS perspective about an ag sector landowner, the thing we'll usually say is we'll talk about farmers. And of course, if you're a rancher, we really intend to include you, but sometimes it's just quicker and easier. Something else, so we say farmer, but it really covers anybody that's in the midst of, you know, planting things, nurturing things, cultivating things, whether they're plants or animals. Where we kind of stop, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but NRCS sort of stops. We talk a lot of times about the farm gate. So obviously there's a lot of energy input into the food production system after something leaves the farm. It goes into perhaps a processing facility. It gets trucked to a grocery store. It gets refrigerated, somewhere in between all of those things. Those are things we don't typically spend much time worrying about. So we're really kind of like what happens on the borders of the farm, what kind of decisions get made on the farm that affect energy use. So my next thing was kind of a little bit of a history background. NRCS really, probably many of you know this, but we kind of came out of the Dust Bowl. Started out as Soil Erosion Service, eventually got various name changes and whatnot. The overlay that is in 73, you know, we had an oil embargo. First sort of probably the first modern energy crisis after we figured out how to harness steam. NRCS was born in 94, I shouldn't say really born, but converted, got renamed and really kind of wrapped up a whole bunch of different natural resources. But it was 2006 when this energy technology team got formed, and it was 2010 when NRCS finally formally adopted energy resource concerns. 2011, we created or modified a conservation practice standard called Farmstead Energy Improvement. And then in 2013, we came up with two other really energy-focused practice standards, one for lighting, one for building envelope. And also in 2013, we designated one person in each state as a technical lead for quality assurance for energy. I'm going to go into the conservation practice standards later on, but I also want to just make a comment that energy has been kind of a correlated outcome, almost sometimes an incidental result of many of the other things that we've historically done, primarily in the realm of irrigation, water management, because of pumping power requirements, and then also in terms of tillage operations, because of the diesel fuel needed to move tractors around, break up ground, and do all those kinds of things. But we really didn't formally look at energy until, again, in 2010, and just a little before that we started doing some energy stuff more distinctly, and that was mostly done for air quality and greenhouse gas purposes. So this 2006 is kind of a time frame that I'm going to spend a little bit more time with. And one of the things I pulled off of the Energy Information Administration was this kind of little brief snapshot of diesel costs. So if you go back before 1998, there's times where diesel costs were pretty high, but you can see that 2006 was sort of a period of spiking diesel. And natural gas kind of had climbed up into 2006 as well. Now you can kind of ask a question when you look at this, is like, well, not a lot of farmers or ranchers or whatnot really use natural gas. If they're using that kind of fuel, it's typically going to be propane, so does it matter? And then the other thing is I've pulled up an industrial price, and you could argue that that doesn't really make much relevance for farmers. So the reason I do that is because natural gas is really, it's one of the key reasons, or key drivers for synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. It's a primary feedstock. It's also pivotal to the process heat. And then a fair amount of natural gas is burned to create electricity that helps run these fertilizer facilities, production facilities, behind coal. And of course, that's kind of changing right now as we're shifting more towards natural gas in the generation. But still, really become a critical issue for farmers how this goes. So with that little bit of history then, I'm going to kind of turn into some of the targets and things that NRCS is really trying to pursue. And I'm going to be kind of using this sort of wheel, I guess, to talk about sort of different spheres, or the sphere of energy, and I guess I've kind of got these different spokes. So kind of looking at, energy need, thinking about what does a farmer need, what is somebody in the ag world, what do they need to operate their facility, where do these supplies come from? That's, of course, what I was just looking at in terms of natural gas and diesel fuel prices and those kinds of things. And then the other realm is energy exports. And again, thinking about when this, that 2006, that was kind of a period where, I guess in my mind, there had been an awful lot of motion and movement and expectation that ag lands were going to really be a strong support for serving both U.S. and global energy needs, and so there was a lot of motion that direction. That was another early focus and kind of a continued focus of NRCS as a larger organization to make that kind of thing happen. That's been proving to be a difficult transition to go to that as a strong energy source, but still a piece of the puzzle. So the main thing, again, this kind of gets back to the whole thing about Farmgate, is the on-farm need and supply picture. It's kind of that energy balance that is a critical function and interest to kind of the technology development team and to kind of on the technical side, particularly for us at NRCS. And really, even within that balance, our primary direction is looking at the need end of it. So we're really kind of principally trying to drive into looking at how do you reduce the farm energy use, how do you reduce the needs, and most of that's through looking at energy efficiency opportunities and improvements. So I do want to talk a little bit just here about, again, the broader sense of what the energy supply looks like, kind of in the world of agriculture. And basically you can kind of see the top piece of it's coming in diesel and gasoline. Most of it's diesel, synthetic fertilizers, and then kind of electricity sort of in third place in terms of total energy input to national farming input. Now, what that kind of correlates to, I guess, and the reason I highlight this is that basically when you boil all that down, there's not an awful lot of the energy that agriculture uses that isn't derived from fossil fuels. They get, more or less 3% kind of comes through, and that's renewable resource derived. Most of that comes in as a small fraction of the total electricity supply. So when we do energy efficiency improvements, when we can reduce the energy use on a farm, almost all of that impacts fossil fuel consumptions. And so knowing all of this, and I guess the question is, what do we do next? Where would we like to go to change this picture? And ultimately, eventually, we probably need to get to the point where we have net zero ag. And net zero is a term that probably, a lot of folks are familiar with, particularly from the building sector, net zero homes, net zero whatever. But obviously, at some level, you're saying, in the left-hand box, saying we can get our energy needs met, and we can do this on a kind of an ongoing basis with renewable resources, sort of in average. There's a few things, of course, the question of, do you try to account for embedded energy issues? De minimis comes from hanging around with lawyers and financial people too long. It just means tiny. It's a little thing. We kind of ignore it. So if you need a little bit of fossil energy, maybe we'll forget about it for right now. But in bulk, we really would have to get to that place where we've got our energy needs being met from renewable sources, which then puts me in the right side of the screen here and looking at, what are those steps? Well, first, obviously, control your energy needs so that what's left over is easier to satisfy with the renewable resources. And then, of course, that takes you into the renewable resource section. So that first step is just shrink the pie. And that is, again, that is the main thing that NRCS has been working on in terms of how to deal with energy on farms, is really kind of, can we get that to be reduced? Differs by farm, differs by region, and all those kinds of things. Once you have that taken care of, and once you get the pie as small as kind of rationally possible, then start figuring out how do you serve that need with renewable sources. That's not really something that NRCS has got a lot of focus on. We're not putting a lot of effort or time or money into that, but certainly other folks do. Rural development does that. Certain utilities do that. You all can do that. There's other folks in that kind of realm that are working on those things. So now with that, I kind of want to switch into looking at the, how do we get where we think we want to go? And broadly speaking, this is what NRCS would tend to do. NRCS does this with not just energy, but everything else. We start with this idea of identifying a resource concern. If we're in the energy realm, then it's like, okay, well, we're going to probably do an energy study to figure out what our options are, and then if there are good options, then maybe we'll try to make some kind of an improvement, and we'll use a conservation practice standard to do that. So I will talk more about that as we kind of go through. And what I'm trying to show here is a kind of a simple structure of how NRCS is built. Mostly right here is kind of this is how staff interacts. I've got a variety of kind of things here. The implication of putting this farmers, ranchers, other landowners kind of in the central box is the idea that we really are, ideally we're kind of trying to build from the ground up. What are the needs of the landowner and the land, and then how do we kind of serve those needs? The NRCS team is really kind of built mostly from existing staff that builds on long-standing connections and ties with folks all across the country through our field offices. But we do work with external partners in a variety of ways. Now the other thing, and it was on my agenda, if you remember, down towards the bottom, was money. I won't talk in a lot of detail about the funding sources, but recognize that obviously you can study things all day long, and evaluate them and identify them, and a lot of stuff may not happen because nobody has the money to pay for it. So there is funding connected to most of this stuff. It's really, that's in general, it's always good. Go talk to your field office, or direct farmers. If you're working with farmers, send them to try to get them to work with NRCS field office folks, because what goes on in any individual state they've got a certain amount of flexibility to gear their work and efforts towards what their needs are. So you're not always going to get a good global answer. So that's a good place to go. Now the NRCS, we've got really kind of 51, we call them states, but 2 of them are really areas. But there's 51 jurisdictions that's how kind of NRCS is structured, and that's again where I say within any one of those locations, whether it's Montana or the Pacific Islands or the Caribbean or Alabama or Pennsylvania, they've got a little bit of a different delivery model and different setup for what their situation and needs are. On the technical side, one of the primary support means for each of these states is the tech support centers. So I'm out in the West NTSC in Oregon, but we've got the 3 different tech centers. The folks in the East are serving 2 regions. And at each of the tech centers, if you go on the websites or whatnot, you're going to find the staffing. What you'll find is a variety of engineers, a variety of scientists, people that work in a whole realm of things that have to do with ag. What you won't find is any explicit energy staff at any one of the tech centers. We again have these kind of historic links. You know, we got irrigation engineers at each tech center. They have worked obviously on energy issues for probably their whole career. We got agronomists who worry about tillage, and they've been working in, you know, their concerns typically are about soil health in terms of soil loss and the qualities of the soils, but they have as a corollary, they can evaluate the estimated fuel use requirements for doing different types of tillage operations. But nobody, just because of, again, this is a relatively new thing for NRCS, is really on the core staff of these tech centers trained to do energy work directly. The other thing that we do have going on is this tech development teams, and each of the centers hosts three of these teams. The West Center happens to host energy, which I'm part of. We also host what's called the air quality and atmospheric change team and the water quality and quantity team. Very strong connections to energy with all 3 of the teams out here at the West Tech Center. The East Tech Center, and I'm just going to highlight the ones that have the biggest energy connections. They work with the manure. They have the manure management team out there in North Carolina, and obviously you start dealing with manure, you got to use a lot of energy to take care of it, and you also have the possibility of extracting some energy back out of it in various forms and fashions. So again, kind of looking at the technical structure overall, and just as kind of a reminder where we were, the next thing I want to do is go and spend some time looking over here at this partner block off to the side. And there's an awful lot of different folks, and I'll just leave this with you. You can come back to view it at whatever point if it makes sense and is of interest to you, but a lot of our partners are within USDA. There's other partners throughout other parts of the federal government. DOD is not because we need protection when we're out doing our work, but they've actually got a lot of projects going on where they're looking for like renewable fuels and things like that. So, and that's more kind of in that export realm, going back to the spokes on that energy wheel. So I don't deal with the folks from DOD much, but certainly we get some interactions with DOE and Interior, and BLM, and EPA has got some good stuff going on. Universities have been partnering with NRCS in a wide range of areas for a long time, but of course, from an energy standpoint, we're looking at you know, some really specific areas within the university systems typically. State offices of various kinds and all kinds of a bunch of other people that are, you know, nonprofits, non-governmental orgs, those kinds of things. Now, one thing you might notice here is I changed the term from partners to entities on this previous slide, and I did that, I guess, one, to kind of call out that we do pursue, you know, we're kind of in these parallel efforts, and sometimes we actually do have real direct, distinct partnerships with these folks. Sometimes it's just that we're all working in the same arena. So you shouldn't necessarily take away from this that we're, you know, we're directing ACEE's motions forward, or that they're telling us how to deal farm energy issues or whatever, but obviously we are trying to work together to the extent that we can and that makes sense. So one of our real primary partners, and this is where there is a direct partnership, is with the technical service providers, which I realize maybe I forgot to, oh, there it is, yeah, in the middle of the page, TSP. So anyway, and I mostly just kind of give you this because I'll be going back and forth. And they're critical to NRCS's energy work because of a couple of things. They provide analysis and end up identifying most of the energy upgrades that we're looking at putting further investments in. There's a bit of a caveat there, again, because we've been funding irrigation, water management, tillage for decades. We continue to fund that, so most is probably not a totally accurate term, but certainly the new arena that we've gone into. The other thing is that TSP's an energy standpoint, they're consuming that's where we're devoting our largest amount of funding that we put into energy analysis. Is going through that direction. So at this point, I've got to the place where I intended to stop and take some questions. So if there's anything that's been queued up or anybody's wondering about something I said before, this would be a good time to respond.
Any questions out there at the attendees? I always give people just a second because you've got to type.
Yes, that's totally fine.
Remind us where a list of the TSPs can be found.
You know, I think I have that coming up, but it's at a place called TechReg, and you can get to it a couple of different directions. One is also through the Field Office Technical Guide, which is often referred to as the FOTG or EFOTG, because when it converted, I guess, from paper documents to a web-based thing, it became the electronic Field Office Technical Guide. And I do think I have that. Like I say, I think I have that a little bit later in my presentation. And if I don't, it's a good chance we'll have some time, and I could probably just pull that up. But it's easy to find with a search engine, kind of do FOTG, NRCS, and or TechReg, NRCS. So.
Okay, I don't see any other questions popping up.
Okay, all righty. Well, let's go now back to where, so got all that first set of things done. Now we're looking at some tools, or what's known as technology. So back again here, kind of this big structure, and the little piece I'm going to take a look at now is, again, kind of referred to broadly speaking oftentimes as technology, practice standards, tools, various documents. So when I was looking at the job announcement for the job I got with NRCS in 2010, I noticed that it included this, to acquire and develop nationally relevant technology. And I thought, man, I haven't had a design class since 1982 or something like that. I don't know that I can handle this job. But technology kind of means, building nice spreadsheets, other kinds of models, preparing standards and that kind of stuff. So it's not really, it's not designing a new fan or a better pump or anything like that. So, it's a little bit of internal documents. I think many of you all working with universities, you're fully able to deal with jargon. So this is some of our own. But the primary thing that really establishes the boundaries of the things that we will work on with these landowners comes out of our practice standards. So we've been doing this, again, for a long time. We've got practice standards that dealt with energy. And so when, in 2010, as we were making it a formal area of concern, there was a review of all of the practices that NRCS had. And there was a lot in irrigation, a lot in tillage, some in forestry, etc., that were identified as being ones that could serve a purpose of energy to respond to an energy resource concern. Also coming out of that 2010 review, we revamped this conservation practice standard that became called Farmstead Energy Improvement. It was a very substantial revision of an earlier practice standard that was designed to satisfy air quality concerns. So the other thing that I guess in general, the way our practice standards are set up is you have to have a purpose. And the typical purpose that we use is some type of phrase that says something about reducing energy use. 22, and this is back at in 2010 when all of this review and analysis was done. We had 22 practices where we had some kind or another way of reducing energy use, we thought, by making changes in these different areas. And then there was another 18 that said something about renewable energy, ways to either harness it or deliver it or something. And some of them talked about being able to do both. So the 374 was one that its purpose is described as to reduce energy use. So my little extra note here at the bottom down here, that was in 2010. There's a cyclical review of practices. It's every 5 years. There's sometimes a review that's driven by some other type of event, as in 2010 when we were looking at energy. So this shifts over time. Things come in and come out of being an energy practice. In the realm of energy, we trigger off of this association of our American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers, ASABE. They have a standard. It's called the On-Farm Energy Auditing, Performing On-Farm Energy Audits, I believe is actually its title. It's standard 612 for them. And what I'm showing here on the left side is that what they refer to as major activities, most of these energy-using things or activities. And so again, some of these are things that we had addressed elsewhere in practice standards from NRCS. So I've kind of highlighted some of these red ones. Waste handling cultural practices, which are planting, tilling, etc., water management, irrigation. Those are things that were already addressed elsewhere. Almost everything else on this list landed in standard 374, the Farmstead Energy Improvement that I mentioned earlier. And then in 2013, we kind of started to subdivide that umbrella standard, 374. We broke it down into a slightly refined lighting system improvement, a building envelope improvement. The standard still refers to all of these different systems that are listed on the left-hand side here, the lighting, ventilation, etc. But we are trying to refine it with these new standards as we go down. Now I want to take a quick, yes, this is what I wanted to do. It's kind of a little bit of a step on the side to talk about something I feel like I notice with some regularity is most people that have done energy work, they typically talk about some kind of an energy upgrade. It's either an energy conservation measure, an energy conservation opportunity, an energy efficiency measure. Sometimes other terms are used. NRCS folks more typically tend to think about the payment schedule scenario that specifically provides for an upgrade. And there are multiple payment schedule scenarios that are connected to different conservation practices. And what I realized that I should have done, but I don't think I did, is put in a little slide here, but that would explain this in a little more detail. But basically, within, say, Farmstead Energy Improvement, you might have a payment schedule scenario that says, oh, it's a good idea to use a heat exchanger and do some pre-cooling of milk with groundwater so your refrigeration system doesn't have to work as hard. In the lighting standard, under the lighting standard, there'd be a payment scenario that says, gosh, you know, T8 electronic ballast fixtures are a good replacement for some other types of less efficient fixtures, maybe T12 lamps and old magnetic ballast, that kind of thing. So sometimes we're talking about two different things, or talking about the same thing, just using different terms. So that's kind of the part I was going to talk about practice standards, and then I just wanted to talk about some tools that we have. Again, tools, technology, really, you know, being kind of spreadsheets. So this is sort of some this is a snapshot of sort of a work in progress. We were trying to do some planning, but I mostly am doing it for this upper left-hand corner here. And this is meant to evoke an image of an onion, as in peeling back the layers of an onion. And the conceptual approach here would be that one of the ways you could start is looking at some type of energy use index, how intense energy input is it required for me to do what I do. So the one that has been, I think, most widely studied is milk. How much energy does it take to get a certain amount of milk, or how much energy does it take if you're running a dairy and you got 100 cows? Those numbers are relatively well known. You can kind of look at that, and that gives you a gauge of where you sit. The way then our tools, and I'll go into them in a little more detail, after that, potentially you can start to get into these energy consumption awareness tools, the energy self-assessment tools, and then at some point you may actually, and I've got kind of truncated here, but you might need an energy engineer or an energy analyst to come in and really look at your specific operation and details of what's going on. But the tools, and we developed these tools, they call them the ECAT tools. They're sometimes referred to as 3-click tools, more so internally to NRCS folks or energy estimators. But basically these things are broken down. They kind of look at 4 different areas of energy impacts on the farm. One of the things I want to highlight with these is that they have a zip code input field for them, and this is what happens with the zip code data that goes into this. They help get you connected to other people. My little note at the bottom is just that these are very, they're based on typical situations, typical average kind of conditions, and again, that's probably partially relevant to what you do. So this is some of the verbiage that's connected with the energy estimators, which more or less is telling you the same thing. Be careful about what you do with this. It's giving you an idea, kind of a direction, but you shouldn't consider the results to be absolutely precise. Now, the other thing that we've done, and you can get a link off of our energy tools page, is we go off to this energy self-assessment tools. That was something that we funded development through University of Wisconsin, and there's 16 tools altogether, a bunch that are sort of in energy efficiency, conservation realm directly, and then a few others that are renewable energy tools. We also funded a grain drying tool, which, by the way, you can see that there's a grain drying tool here as part of the self-assessment tools. It's a separate grain drying tool that we funded. It goes off to Purdue. So you see this again, but again, same kind of caveats. Be cautious about what you do with the results. And then the other thing I want to point out is that there are other tools. We're not the only people that have developed energy assessment tools. One pretty handy place to go is over here to the National Center for Appropriate Technology. They got a couple dozen of these things, including the NRCS tools that you can go and kind of use as a way to just begin to get an assessment of an operation. So the goal for us with the tools is to be able to, really kind of get somebody to look what's kind of going on, give them a rough order of magnitude idea of what kind of savings they might get if they took certain actions, different kind of ideas about what kind of things they might change, and probably it's sort of a go, no-go kind of thing. It's like, oh, that looks like I should spend more time with that, or gee whiz, it looks like I'd be wasting my time to think about that anymore. The next step may really be to call in somebody else. We hope that if that's what the landowner is thinking, they might contact us. Perhaps we get them lined up for an energy study that's really based on more site-specific data. And we do have money to help make that happen. I'm going to kind of go back. I talked earlier about the TSPs. A lot going on maybe with this, but what you see here is kind of, if somebody does want to get an analysis done, they start, and I kind of have this step one is we go to landowner would contact NRCS. We might say, yep, you know, you look like you're a good candidate for getting an energy analysis. We'll contract with you to have one done. Then the client would go out, the customer, the landowner would go out, and they would find a TSP they wanted to work with. The TSP would deliver back to them a report. Then that landowner would come in step 3. They'd come back to NRCS and say, hey, I got the report. You guys had, you know, contracted with me to go out and get a report. I'd like to get some money to help pay for this, you know, now that I've got it done. And then step 4 might be where you get NRCS. You might have this technical service provider and the landowner sitting down or talking through the phone or whatever, trying to decide what to do next. So what this diagram doesn't show you is, of course, what that next step is in moving forward. The other part that is not on this diagram is what happened before this, where the consultant, the analyst, showed up and said they were interested in becoming the certified TSP through NRCS. NRCS offices offer, occasionally they'll offer workshops to work with prospective TSP folks to kind of get them into the process, get them run through that. Can be fairly involved, but that sort of helps simplify the process for those folks. And then, of course, again, once it's all figured out, then the next steps is to move forward into design and to actually implement the project. Now, that is the NRCS approach to doing an energy study. There are some other options. So this is a piece of what I had earlier. You know, we might get into doing an energy study. This is 3 little chunks out of our farmstead energy improvement practice. That's the umbrella one that I mentioned earlier. So one of the criteria is that it's there to implement recommendations from ASABE Standard 612 compliant audits. So that doesn't have to be NRCS. You know, that could be done by somebody else. It could be done by maybe a utility-funded project. Maybe it'd be something that, you know, an extension agent was doing that for landowners, and they could take that information to NRCS. So our big thing is that we're saying, you know, it needs to comply with Standard 612. And we have similar language in the lighting and the building improvement practice standard that refers back to this ASABE standard. What's probably important to keep in mind is that the practices that we've done for years that were maybe principally a water resource standard, for example, if it was some kind of a irrigation system modification that could be used to reduce energy use, they have typically different criteria. They don't refer to Standard 612. So it's possible for farmers to implement a number of energy improvements without doing this on-farm study, either using the Ag EMP, which is our version of it, or somebody else's that's compliant with Standard 612. Now, if you're interested, there's a series of webinars that we're doing internally. Well, not internally, but NRCS is putting them together and hosting them. And we did, in March, we did a webinar that talked about that farmstead energy lighting and building envelope. We did one in May that looked more specifically both at the technology of lighting systems and also a little bit more detail at that lighting practice standard. We have a webinar scheduled for July to talk about energy analysis, and we're going to postpone that. We haven't landed on a date, but sometime in August. And at that point, we're going to end up looking at some fairly major updates to the NRCS Ag Energy Management Plan. That'll be something that we're expecting that we're going to be adopting in fiscal year 15. So we're kind of refining some of the timing on all of that. We're planning in September to come in and talk about the steps that go after we get that study done, after somebody's done that analysis and the landowners decided what kind of improvements they're interested in. How do you actually go in and get the darn things built? And then in November, we're expecting to do have a presentation just discussing some of the energy opportunities within poultry operations. So that's something you can find. The link is ungodly long, so I'm just saying, if you search for NRCS Energy Conservation Opportunity Webinar or something similar to that, you should find this pretty quickly. There's my contact info, and then the last thing I guess I'll do is stop again to see if there's any other questions.
Any questions for Kip? We have one. The tools are great. I assume that was the energy analysis tools you mentioned back in the, I don't know, maybe 10 slides ago. Are they regularly updated?
Well, the tools are, and they vary. And I don't know how easily I can get back to it quickly, but I'll try not to make anybody dizzy. So if you see here, we've got these 4 tools. Let me see here. Yeah, it's a little bit easier to see. So we've got the animal housing, irrigation, nitrogen, and tillage tool that are ones that NRCS has developed, and we've got them in-house, if you will. So we are right now trying to see if we can go through and update the tillage tool. The tillage tool is derived principally from data that's in a program, a much larger, more advanced, more developed, more robust program called Russell II that looks at erosion, and then as a subset of it, it does energy calculation. It does an energy estimate in terms of, depending on what you're doing in terms of your tillage sequences and your crop rotations and all of that, it will provide an estimated diesel fuel requirement per acre for what you specify. This tool is a simplified version of that is looking at some kind of subset of it. And whenever we did this, and I'm trying to remember exactly when it was rolled out, it was before my time. I think it was about sometime in that 2006, 2007 window, give or take. But this year we believe we have adequate O&M funds to go through and revise that. One of the things I didn't say earlier, but it's just been a burden and a hurdle for us, is that NRCS adopted energy as a resource concern, really decided to go after it in a big way, just really before serious sustained budget reductions kind of started to take place. So we've been trying to build this new capacity in the midst of reduced resources. So it's kind of a constant struggle for us to really make these things, keep them going. So now that's that update and change and whatnot. That again, that refers to these 4 tools specifically. The next thing I had showed was the link over to the tools that we had funded through University of Wisconsin. We had plans to bring those in-house. That was subject to a budget cut. We've barely been able really to fund the maintenance with really, I guess, I don't know if I should say maybe operation rather than maintenance. So those tools, they've done, the Wisconsin folks have taken care of different things over time, but we are, for example, notably, one of the things that you won't find when you do the lighting tool there is any real discussion or looking at LEDs. LEDs, kind of taken the lighting world by storm here in the last couple of years. We haven't been able to fund that and get that up to date. I guess I would suggest that the fundamental underlying elements of most of these things is relatively stable, but that's certainly an area where things have changed.
Okay, and I think a couple slides later you were talking about energy audits, and there's a question, are those investment grade, and could you take them to the bank for financing?
Those are not investment grade audits, not ours, the Ag Energy Management Plans. So if you go to the ASABE standard 612 that I referred to, they refer to they have categories type 1 and type 2 audits. There's not a real good alignment between that type 1 and type 2. If you go like Association of Energy Engineers, they have they also have a kind of a similar grade scale. ASHRAE has a similar kind of grade scale. The alignment between all of those different entities is not, in my view, particularly great. But I can tell you that you certainly can't. They're not considered investment grade audits. Most of those ag EMPs, part of it, I guess, the other part of it is the ones that we fund. We're not. You probably would be hard pressed, at least in my experience. Many of them are not looking at operations big enough to entice any banker into funding the upgrades. What they are intended to do is be adequate for us to take action and move forward in NRCS. And so, where I think the potential gap falls in then is if somebody comes in to try to implement the recommendations of their energy study, and they're not funded because they don't make the ranking or the criteria, or NRCS runs out of money before they can fund that, then certainly somebody might want to try to go get private financing for it. But yeah, investment grade, no.
Okay, any other questions for Kip? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so I don't know, Milt, if you want to chime in. Otherwise, I will just thank Kip for his time and thank all you participants for your time, and remind everyone that the webinar was recorded and will be available in the near future on the E3A website. And I think we're talking through maybe some other webinar options after skipping the month of July, because that's usually a tough one for everyone out enjoying the nice weather. So thanks, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kip.
Thank you, Kip. And actually, one last thing. Could you tell us the easiest way to get a hold of your state contacts? I mean, are all the energy contacts fairly active across the country?
Oh, great question. Oops, let me see here.
Sorry, I snuck in there at the end. I should have typed it in.
No, that's okay. So we have a couple of different kind of state contacts. We have, at the time, by kind of in that 2006 timeframe, we identified an energy state contact for each state. It was kind of a broad range of folks. The folks that have last year got identified as the technical leads, they are pretty engaged. We've been doing a lot of web training with them. So it's going to vary state by state. Some states have been more actively involved than other states, but yeah, I think there's a good contact group. I'm trying to think. We don't have that in a universal place, a uniform place to go to and say, hey, who is that person? Again, probably for many folks it'd be contacting, if it's kind of like, for example, if you were trying to make contact with somebody in Wyoming, contacting the state office and getting in touch with the engineering group would be kind of the starting place. If it was somebody at a more local level, a landowner, they'd probably want to start with their field office folks and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this, and then depending on how the state's structured their delivery, they'll put them in touch with kind of the right person. So a lot of the responsibility of these identified technical leads is at a pretty, they are mostly identified as saying they're responsible for quality assurance review. So at the end of the year, or on an ongoing basis, to look at the kind of work that's being done in the energy realm. So they're not necessarily responsible for the day-to-day stuff. So it depends again how the state has kind of structured that. So I'd say, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for technical feedback, start with the state office engineering group. If you're looking for funding, then that would be kind of a different group of people, and either that's some equip specialist or programs folks at the state level or in the field office.
All right, thank you for letting me squeeze that question in.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Okay, thanks again, everyone, and we'll be in touch about future endeavors. Have a good afternoon.
All righty.